Welcome to the Previously Rockhounding podcast, where we explore the ye olden days of rockhounding and lapidary through the lens of vintage issues of Rock and Gems magazine.
Today is episode 1. We're looking at Rock and Gem magazine from June 1975.
We certainly are. Now this is my first time ever cracking open a Rock and Gems magazine. I've never seen a modern one.
I've seen the cover.
Likewise, I take that back.
An image of the cover.
I've seen the covers.
I've never opened one and looked at it.
I guess actually, let me take that back. I've read a couple of articles about the Wild Turkey Mine, and that's here in Northeast Washington, and the China Hollow Mine. So like they had articles that were posted as excerpts online. So I have read 2 articles out of a modern issue. But otherwise I have no exposure.
Not quite the same as leafing through a magazine.
I agree. Yeah. That is a little different. And
Well, what did you think about leafing through this magazine? Was it what you expected it to be, since this is our first one we've ever looked at?
Well, my first takeaway was probably the ads.
Yeah.
Okay, so the ads are actually, they're quite cool. I enjoyed looking at the ads in it.
Yeah.
One thing that really stands out is obviously the price, right? Like when you go through this, it's like 1970s pricing on stuff, and you're like, that is so cheap. Now, that's like looking at it through the lens of today. I did do some adjustments for inflation.
Yeah.
I just picked like one random thing, because there's an ad in there for selling bulk rock, like by the pound. And they were selling rose quartz by the pound for 75 cents. Okay? And that's 1975 prices. You adjust it for inflation, and it was $4.80 in 2021. So still
pretty reasonable.
Yeah, for like
a pound.
For a full pound of something. But I kind of just playing around did that for a number of things, and some of it you're like, this is some screaming deals. Like, obviously who knows what the quality would have been, right?
Is it a one pound piece, or is it 16 to infinite
There lies the problem.
Pound of dust.
Yeah, there lies the problem with mail order.
Yeah.
Right? Like no pictures or nothing. So I thought that was kind of interesting. Obviously, they have like all the ads for different machines and stuff where you see it, and I'm like, I certainly get inspiration. As somebody that likes to build stuff, I see these old machines, and I'm like, oh, like it's not a design that's current.
I don't know. I don't know a lot about what the machines really look like, and they all look pretty similar to current designs to me, but I didn't really look too hard because I don't know too much about it.
Another thing that really stood out with the ads was subscription services.
Yeah.
So modern day times today, 2022, this whole subscription boxes where you can sign up for a thing and get it mailed to your house. It's really kind of promoted as this modern thing. Like, oh yeah, are you really into beef jerky? Here's a beef jerky subscription box sent to your house every month. And people, that's in there. That's in here.
I didn't see that.
Yeah, so you can pay, and every month they would send you 10 pounds of different agate.
I didn't see that.
Stuff like that. I'm like, why doesn't that exist?
They had one for books, but it wasn't send a book a month. It was more like those C.D. things of the late 90s where you're like, pay $5 for a membership and great deals on books.
I like the idea of a rock box subscription service. That's smart.
That's gotta exist.
I don't know.
That seems so simple.
Business idea for anybody listening.
Yeah. You could have a tumbling box, a slabbing box.
There's a lot that you could do at different levels, and an entrepreneur person could contact companies and get like wholesale rock
Yeah.
and sell. Not, I guess you wouldn't. It would be like a lower. It would be between wholesale and retail, right? Because it's not like retailing, like piecemealing something out.
Yeah.
It'd be like, oh, this month, like if you individually bought all of this 10 pound of agate, it would cost $100, but the box is 65. But that's still you pay 40 for it all.
Yeah.
And like I don't
I
know. I
feel
thought that
like
was
that
interesting
exists.
that was in there.
I saw one ad. It was for Ed's House of Gems in Portland.
Yeah.
Like that one's been around so long, but they said you can get surprise box 110 pounds of, they called it scenic agate from India, and it was $50. And they're like, oh, it's just as we get it, we ship it straight to you. So like theoretically, they're not picking through it.
They're definitely picking through it.
But I don't know what scenic agate is. Some of the stuff had some names that I don't know, maybe haven't
I think some of the
stood the test of time for. I feel like the names have changed or maybe more specific now versus you're not like scenic agate. You're like, I don't know.
Yeah, I do think some of the common names have changed.
Yeah.
It's funny that you bring up Ed's House of Gems. It's closed or on the way to being closed.
Oh, really?
Yeah, so Ed's House of Gems is in northeast, or is that northeast or south? Whatever. Right. On the north side of Portland, off of Sandy Boulevard, and I guess I don't know if he passed away or if he just retired, and his kids didn't want anything to do with it, so I think the business died. So no more Ed's House of Gems.
It is around from this. I mean, it was around from the 70s at least.
Yeah. Otherwise, we could have gone there and been like, so I have this ad. I would like my scenic agate. Here's $50.
You'd probably be like, oh, you'd probably like that if you showed them that.
Yeah, I mean it's there's a lot of like fun in just viewing the ads.
Yeah.
I thought that was kind of fun. Were there any other ads that really stood out to you?
There was one ad for yellow opal, and they described it as being from Idaho's primitive area.
Yeah, I don't know what that is.
Yeah, and I was like, what could that mean? Just like the forested area? I mean, I know Idaho doesn't look like it did in 1975, but I don't know if they're like selling this idea of like Idaho being like primitive land. And
I mean, Idaho kind of probably looks similar. I mean, outside of like the greater Boise area, how much of it's really changed?
Yeah, I thought that was, I don't know, I just noticing things in it that pertain to this area, and really that's what stuck out to me.
Reading through the magazine in general, I certainly, some of the, how to say this, some of the language that they used and the wording of things, I'm like, oh, like, I don't associate the mid-70s with like kind of having like a different, I don't know, how would you call it?
What do you mean?
Like, the phrasing of things is a little off.
It did seem like almost like formal.
Mm-hmm.
It sounded kind of formal in the way some of the stuff was written.
Just different. I wasn't expecting that out of a magazine, I guess.
Yeah.
Well, there's a couple of articles that I thought were particularly of interest to me. There's a little. It seems like at the beginning of these, they have a little section called the Glory Hole.
Yeah.
And in it, they were talking about their Baja trip.
Mm-hmm.
And so I guess it's like, how would you describe that portion of the magazine? I guess it's just like a little...
well, they have like a few regular columns.
Yeah.
But that was the only regular column that was at the beginning. It was like the very first thing you read. The other regular columns were at the end, which I thought was, I guess... some magazines do that, like you have your advice column at the end, like a weekly newspaper. But yeah, it was like a regular, almost like an editor's kind of note.
A little bit like that.
I don't think it was the editor.
I thought it was kind of fun to read their little thoughts on their Baja trip, because it's virtually exactly like what we do. Like not going to Baja, but like, like going out and you're like, oh, like camping out, like looking for rocks, like really rockhounding from the actual gathering standpoint didn't really seem like it has changed a whole lot, except I probably wouldn't go down to Baja right now and do that.
Yeah. Then they said it rained a lot in Baja.
Yeah. I mean, I
It's
don't
not
know.
what I imagine.
That's not what I
I
imagine
don't think
either.
they said they picked up. It was almost like a trip report because they were just like, yeah, we saw some boring granite.
I don't think they described it as boring, but it
I
was
think
like,
they
yeah, they were
did.
just describing like the host rock, like the
Yeah.
schists and basalts and granites, which isn't. I don't know anything about Baja, but generally, I don't imagine a very small area as having schists, granites, limestones, and basalts like all mushed into one little
Yeah.
spot. So I don't know if I necessarily agree with their assessment of the rocks that they were looking at.
Right. I don't know anything about the rocks there. It was a very casual, like,
Yeah.
little column. It wasn't like the other one. They had that, uh, not trip report, but the report on going to Death Valley.
Mm-hmm.
Um, I don't know. I was wondering if they talk about like, oh, you can go like this little side trip and go out here, but they weren't really like super. They were pretty detailed on like, okay, see this gas station? It's on your left. Like, zero out your odometer, but they weren't like, go here and find this thing, go here. There wasn't like pictures of things, and they weren't like, we found crystals that were 8 inches long. Like,
Yeah. They definitely said that they found some stuff. Are you referring to like their outside of Death
yeah,
Valley?
Death
Yeah.
Valley.
So there's an article about Death Valley and like, well, you can't rock hound in Death Valley, so
Right.
it's like outside Death Valley. Uh, I think they said they found some quarter-inch size crystals,
Hmm.
which is very reasonable, and I
Yeah.
believe it, as opposed to and sometimes like people certainly embellish,
Yeah.
and
Yeah, it seemed very modest in their
yes, very
trip.
modest.
But also, I was wondering if the land has changed at all in Death Valley. Has like the national monument gotten any bigger or smaller? Or I mean, not probably not smaller. Like, I didn't map out where they were, but I was like, I don't. I wonder if you can even rockhound there anymore.
I thought it was interesting to read their directions
Hmm.
because the way I look at it, we have this time period of like rock hounding books, and oftentimes their directions are complete trash.
Yeah.
And they're like, take a right after the big tree, and you're like, well, come on. Obviously, a GPS is superior to that, but having like mileage, like at this intersection, reset your odometer and then drive
Yeah.
42 miles. Like that is, it's interesting that we went from pretty good directions to
Yeah.
terrible directions to now computer aided directions.
Yeah. Yeah, that was one thing, the difference between how they had to, yeah, like giving directions. And there's also one thing in there about scouting a spot. There was an article about Martin Koning, who was a like top lapidary guy in Arizona, and it said he had discovered it was like 300 agate beds. And I thought it was interesting. It said like he studied the formations and stuff, and it said first step was to obtain an airplane and fly over the region to spot surface trends. Like, oh, you had to be so dedicated to be like, really want to find these rocks. I need to get someone to fly me up so I can look down and like mentally or like have some sort of way to know what I'm looking at, map it, and then go there later. Like, that's quite the ordeal versus like, I'm going to sit in my house and like move my hand a little bit. And
So you're looking at satellite photos, is what
yeah,
you're talking
looking at
about.
satellite photos, and I'm going to overlay this and save a pin here and exact coordinates and find a way to get there. Like,
Yeah, and then
finding those 300 agate beds must have been quite the.
I feel like maybe I don't know, 300.
Well, it
I
wasn't
mean,
like.
when I talk to people that live in Arizona,
Yeah.
it certainly does not sound like there's 300 agate beds. I mean, I might be wrong, and they might also
I
be
don't know.
wrong, but maybe any Arizona listeners, are there 300 places to go for agates in your
I think
state?
some of them were quite small, maybe.
Yeah.
Just like not beds, more like occurrences is maybe. Like, it was like, oh, he like looked in the washes, and then when he finds something, he follows it up and he like continues up into the mountain to find the seam. And sometimes it was like one of them, they're like, oh, it's almost all worked out. Like, it's not like a huge infinite. It's not the like fire agate of Arizona where you're like, it's everywhere. It was just like, oh, he found one little seam, and that's called an agate bed, I guess.
I'm certainly spoiled by all of the technology at our disposal.
Yeah.
You know, like to be able to read everything in one place. You know, I look at USGS online. I can read scanned geologist documents and field reports. Yeah, it's an incredible resource to have versus having to go out and get a plane. But that article, some of the stuff that stood out to me was they had some photos of his shop, and a lot of the stuff in his shop was like homemade equipment or like highly modified to the point where the people that were writing the article that came out to see it, they like were like, wow, like everything is very customized for him. And at some point, he was even making his own grinding wheels and his own saw blades. So that's some dedication.
Why would you make your own saw blade?
Before wide manufacturing of saw blades, because in the I don't think they said his age, but I mean, if he was in his late 50s, 60s in 1970, I mean, he'd been doing lapidary basically his whole life. Like, I mean, I do know that people would take steel discs and take a cold chisel and go around the perimeter of the disc, making notches, and get industrial diamonds and force them in and close the notches. And you had to make everything if you wanted to cut these rocks, which, man, if that would be quite the skill set that you would have to build before being able to do some of this stuff.
Yeah. There was one thing they said, it was like little blurbs about updates about companies, and it said Covington Engineering Corporation was like their 126th year. That's not the same Covington that's around now, is it?
I don't know.
Oh.
I'm not sure.
126 years is a long, like how much interest was there in lapidary, and what were they making in 1850?
I don't.
Like, what did that company look like?
Or what did they used to make?
Yeah.
Because, like, you know, I mean, even big, like, grocery stores and stuff, like, sometimes they started as, like, a company making wax. And then, like, over time it transitioned. Like, maybe they had been around that whole time, but they just weren't doing the lapidary.
Yeah, I don't know. I thought also in that little blurb for Covington, they said they were like, oh, their stuff's so good, and they kept their prices at the 1973 level, because like between 1973 and 75 there was crazy inflation. I thought it was interesting to see talk about that in here, and part of like everything's just, nothing has changed.
I mean, some of the little trip reports, like the Outside Death Valley one, that article, they mentioned gas prices in the very beginning of it. I mean, for those of you who maybe weren't alive then, or just maybe aren't aware, but the gas crisis of the 1973, the gas crisis, oil crisis, whatever, really, really high fuel prices relative to people's income levels. So nothing's changed there. I mean, the number of times that I hear from people about high price of fuel is often. So it's interesting to see how little. How little has changed.
Yeah. One other thing that I thought was interesting that is the same, seems like hasn't changed, is there was ads like promising solutions for, like, they would say like messy DOP wax, and they're like, no more, you don't have to do it anymore, like we got this tape or we got this thing to replace DOP wax, but like you still use that now. Yeah. And it's still annoying.
It's still annoying. You still use it. There were some gimmicky ads that, but you know, I mean, that was.
I'm sure
has it always been
current Rock and Gem magazine? There's also gimmicky ads.
After we get through all of these issues, we're gonna have to grab a couple of current ones and compare. That could be fun. There was some, as far as the lapidary goes.
There was a lot of lapidary.
There was a lot, and I kind of liked some of it. Like they did a thing about casting, like lost wax casting, and I don't know much about it.
Yeah, I don't.
but I do know that people today really kind of hold it in like high regard as far as like people currently practicing it. And in this issue, they had like step-by-step instructions with like really good photos and like really it was a really
It said the photos were, it was like, oh, it was like the one on Steam, they call it like Steam casting.
Mhm.
And they're like, yeah, you can buy a kit from this company. Actually, the photos we used are what's included with the kit. So like it was like half article, half ad.
That's true.
But they were, yeah, they were the photos from the instructional booklet that comes with the kit, so they were pretty good. I mean, I still didn't follow what they were doing. I don't know. I've never heard of it.
I don't really know that process, but like, I mean, it would certainly be in that company's best interest to like provide accurate photos and like a description so that when you get it, you can actually do the stuff.
Right.
But like, I thought that was kind of interesting how it's just sitting there in a magazine on how to do it. And I'm sure it's on the internet, but like, it's not a thing that is often practiced in the world of lapidary and jewelry making.
Mm-hmm.
I did also like their sunstone necklace because that was very basic. It's like I forgot the name of the actual little like jewelry finding, but basically it was take a bunch of sunstones, which it's like a form of labradorite, and they come from Oregon sunstones, and just connect them all in a big chain, and you're done.
Yeah, it was like put caps on each side and connect them with what you like glue the caps on.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that was it.
That was pretty much it. And they had a bunch. They also did chain necklaces, which you don't see anybody with a chain necklace. That's very mid 70s, but it certainly is something you could do. It's kind of almost like chainmail. You bend little rings and make a braided chain necklace that you can put stuff on.
Yeah, it seemed like they really tried to like touch every single thing you could possibly be interested in the realm of rocks and gems and lapidary. And I mean, they talked about treasure hunting a number of times. There was an article on puka shells because that was trendy in that. They're like some celebrity was seen wearing
O.J.
them.
Simpson was wearing it.
Well, yeah, but he wasn't the first one.
No, he wasn't.
It was like some other person was the first person, and they started the craze, and so it was like the article on puka shells. I'm thinking that's not really a rock or a gem, but sure. I mean, different types of. There's a lot of jewelry stuff. Like making jewelry was more focused than I would have thought, but. That's what you do with your rocks and your gems.
That's generally it. I mean, I did like that article about Martin Combing.
Yeah.
Yeah, his profile was really good.
The guy from Arizona who discovered the agate beds. Yeah.
I like that. That was a good article. Anything else that's
in that article, they said he had a way for. There's a few things I read in it that I had not heard of. It said. And I don't know if they're still accurate or if it's something that's not accurate anymore, but in that article he had like his classification system for agates, which it seemed like just he kind of made up and used. And it was like things that formed in a vug, things that formed in a seam, things that formed in a really big seam, and everything. The last category was Montana agate, which he said it was formed in sediments as opposed to volcanic environment. Is that accurate?
I don't think so. I don't think that's accurate.
Okay. That's what they thought, I guess. They used to think that, or he thought that?
Yeah, I think he may have just thought that. I don't, I don't want to speak out of turn. I don't know I don't want to opine upon people's thoughts of the 70s on what.
Yeah, I just didn't know if that was
agates.
I was like, oh, were Montana agates formed differently than other ones? I haven't heard anything, so I didn't know if that was.
Well, I'm going to derail the conversation a little bit and talk about roadside geology books, the roadside geology series, because they have really old ones and really new ones. And it's amazing to see what geology was like in the 80s versus 2020.
Even when we go to places with signs
Yeah, like
BLM signs were like, this isn't even true anymore.
Yeah, so much happened between 1980 and 2020 as far as like, the roadside geology series of books. When you look at these states, you're like, there has been so much progress in that field, and I would assume that the theories being put forth in these magazines were also quite dated.
Yeah.
So like,
I mean, it wasn't like them talking about an official theory, just
Yeah.
like that was his thing, and I just happened to see that.
There was a article near the end of the magazine called Shop Talk, and they were talking about saw lubricants.
Yes. I only skimmed it because I don't know anything about saw lubricants.
Well, basically, they were like talking about like the newfangled synthetic oils like you'd have in a car.
They said it was much better than petroleum-based.
Yeah, and it was like 10W50. They were running like 10W50 synthetic oil in a lapidary saw.
What do you run?
Everybody runs mineral oil now.
What is that compared to 10W50?
It's the mineral oil that's designed for lapidary equipment today. It's like thinner than water, right?
Yeah.
It's like just the most liquidy stuff because you want to flush out the cuts. So doing stuff like running diesel and petroleum-based motor oils and even synthetic motor oils is such like a bad idea. I mean, they kind of said they were like, like their sump pump didn't like settle out, like they had a hard time with it because like the sludge from cutting rocks, like it'll settle if it's in like a liquid. If it's suspended in a thick oil, it just goes around and around. But it's just kind of a funny, like they're experimenting with different stuff, and I mean, I thought that was amusing a little bit.
Yeah.
Like I would never in a million years put motor oils in my lapidary saw.
I don't know.
Yeah, well,
Is that what they were using though at that time?
Yeah, back then, I mean, people would use diesel. People would use used motor oil to cut rocks. Like, there's a lot of stuff that people just didn't know better. I mean, it's definitely not a good idea to put things in your saw that can easily catch on fire.
Did mineral oil exist? Was it readily available in the 70s?
I'm not sure.
Were they not using it because it just wasn't a thing that existed to buy, or was it?
It probably wasn't as prevalent. Like now you can go to any farm supply and you can buy farm grade mineral oil, which is better than everything that they use. Yeah. It's not as good as the stuff for lapidary, but maybe I'm wrong. But people take care of their animals, like their horses and stuff, way better than they took care of them in the 70s is what I'm imagining.
Yeah.
So the reason you can go buy mineral oil in such abundance because it's a horse laxative.
Right.
I feel like maybe people didn't care about their horses in the 70s.
Yeah, I don't know.
Any horse lovers out there? Do you want to send me an email? Let me know what people thought about horses in the 70s. What else? Anything else? That's about all I came away from this with.
Two other things. One was in the article about, I should have put headlines on my notes. In the article about the Death Valley, I think it was that one, they said you can go and get marble. There's like a marble quarry, and they're like, it's white, but it'll take aniline rock dye like you can buy in most rock shops.
Yes.
Can you still do that?
You can go buy it?
Yeah. Do people do that?
So I think it's considered a little bit not kosher nowadays to find a rock and dye a rock. However, lots of rocks at rock shops are dyed, but they're dyed in like India and shipped in. It's
kind of cool to dye your own rock. I mean, if you're gonna make jewelry and you're like, I want like this specific shade of rock in my necklace, like why not dye it? You dye your clothes, probably. You dye your hair, dye your rock.
I think people should be able to do whatever they want.
I mean, as long as you're not being like, I found this electric orange.
There's the problem, right? With like unscrupulous sellers misleading people and
What
saying,
is?
here's my neon green
Yeah.
agate, and it's actually just like a piece of quartz that was dyed neon green.
Have you heard of? I mean, what's the process for home dyeing rocks? Because I thought dyeing rocks was like you had to like do fancy like pressure, whatever treating.
It really ranges. I mean, people will dye rocks with like, was it Rip dye?
Really?
Yeah.
How does it get into it?
Well, it's similar to the Columbia Basin agates that we treat with mineral oil, where they basically heat up the rock like in an oven, and then take it out and throw it in the dye, and then through a capillary action, it just kind of gets in, and usually like you can know real quick if something's dyed in that way because like wants to kind of rub off, right?
Yeah, I would think it's not.
There are other methods, other chemicals that you can use that are more permanent. Like think about like when you see a dyed agate at like a rock shop, that dye has gone into that rock.
Right.
Like so, oftentimes it's a process of heating something up, probably holding it at temperature for a long period of time, and usually some quite harsh chemicals. I mean, I would love to experiment with it. I think that'd be interesting to play around with.
Do they sell that at rock shops?
Not anymore.
I've never seen it.
No, I don't think they do.
It's not fast. But you just buy it online, places sell, or you just use it's like special rock dye. It's not like RIT. You're not really using.
I don't think you're. I don't even know how much of the information is out there. I mean, I know some of the tricks that international mines will do. But I've never actually experimented with myself, so I have no idea. I mean, I've
never heard of anyone doing it, so yeah.
I do want to try some of the heat treating stuff where you like turn amethyst into citrine, and
yeah, that's cool.
You know, like it'd be fun to do some experiments, but yeah, I think the dyeing of rocks was just more common.
Do you have anything else to come?
No.
Last thing that I looked up there was an ad in there and it was like Johnny Horizon, and it was like Johnny Horizon 1976, and it's just like a cartoon, not cartoon, but just like a drawing of like a guy, and I was like, what is that? That doesn't look like any of the other ads. It's not like send us $1 for our catalog. It's not like this, and so I was like, is that like a political ad? So I looked it up, and have you heard of Johnny Horizon?
I haven't.
He was like the mascot for the BLM. He was like their version of Smokey the Bear.
I didn't know that was.
Yeah, and his thing was like cleaning up trash basically. And it was like a thing because it's like this is 75, so it was like Johnny Horizon like 1976, because it was like centennial or bicentennial.
That's our co-host. You can ignore her. high budget operation here. So Johnny Horizon, I think
bicentennial. So they're like clean up America, and he was like, clean up your BLM lands, and some singer did like an album with him, and did like and there was like tons of like radio spots with him on it, and he became like a huge thing, and then like BLM like changed hands or something, and
the Bureau of Land Management.
Yes. And the new people didn't like him, and they just like shut him down.
Oh.
But he was like, they're doing all these like marketing, and it said they were gonna have like Johnny Horizon branded campsites, but they didn't do that. But they did have a Johnny Horizon with Parker Brothers kit.
Wait, are you gonna tell me they made a Johnny Horizon action figure?
No.
Oh.
No, they made a kit for kids for like clean, in the vein of like clean up the earth, and it was a air pollution and water pollution test kit, like sold to kids, like do your part, help clean the earth, like by finding air pollution. But it was like Parker Brothers, like when I looked it up, there's like an ad for like, oh, are you into mysteries? Buy Clue. Are you like a little scientist? Get our air pollution test kit. Like, when it was Johnny Horizon co-branded. So.
Is there any? We need to look and see if there's any cool Johnny Horizon hats on eBay.
I don't know. Maybe. Yeah, he was pretty big. I bet there's like posters.
I've never heard of this.
They're like, oh, they got like thousands, tens of thousands of letters from people being like, oh, I will help clean up natural areas. You got it, Johnny Horizon. Like, people loved him. So, yeah.
All right, well, maybe we can stage a protest and a letter writing campaign, and we can make the Bureau of Land Management bring back Johnny Horizon. Or contact Parker Brothers and be like, air test kits for kids.
My kids want to test the air pollution.
Well, thank you for doing the additional research. That's pretty good. Pretty good. Well, I think we can call episode 1 of the Previously Rockhounding podcast wraps.
I think that about wraps it up. That's everything we had for this week's issue.
In episode 2 of the Previously Rockhounding podcast, we will be looking at Rock and Gem magazine from July 1975, which has rock tumbling trips, star rockhounds, and field trips from Texas to Thunder Bay.
I don't know where Thunder Bay is, so that'll be great. We'll find out.
Thanks, everybody, for listening.